Okay, so we know that Azure is being used across many different industries, from finance to public sector. But think about some of those devices that we use day to day, our mobile phones. Have you ever thought about how a telco provider could go ahead and use Azure? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about here on this episode of Cloud with Chris. Hello there, welcome to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you for joining. As we mentioned in the intro there, we've got an interesting session in this Tales from the Real World episode. This time we're going to be focusing maybe on an industry that you don't often hear much about when you hear of these different case studies and stories and all these different things, is thinking about telephony. Telco providers. And it's going to be a really interesting session because it's an industry, I'll be honest, I know very little about, so I'm going to be learning a lot here today as well. But you know the deal. If you like this content, if you like what you hear, please like the episode, please subscribe, please hit the notification bell, because then we know to get more of this style of content onto the show for you here as well. So that's our admin done. Let's go ahead and introduce our guest for this session. Let's go and meet Ivo. Hey there, Ivo. Good evening. How are we?
Good, good, good. And you?
All good, thank you. All good. Really, really excited and pleased to have you with me. Like I mentioned in the intro, I know very little about telco providers. So I am, apart from using them, of course, but I am very excited to learn here today. So glad to have you with us.
Definitely. I have a lot of topics prepared, let's say, and I hope that I can give you a broader deep dive into how telcos work and what cloud can mean for them. So I'm looking
Awesome.
forward to our chat.
Excellent. Likewise. So start at the very beginning. Who are you?
Okay, maybe the most important question. I'm Ivo Hagen. I'm from Belgium and I'm working as a cloud evangelist at CGK. What I do is I transform companies coming from the traditional world into the modernization, where of course cloud is a part of it. And the most important thing is there that we look from a strategy and match those strategy and business needs towards technical solutions and possibilities. I've been working in the past for one of the largest telco providers in Belgium, and that's also why I have some experience about what we have been doing, how the company has been changing, but especially also the struggles we have in adopting new technologies and especially coping with a market who is really fast changing and enormous competitive against other players.
Mm. And I was just about to say that I can imagine it's a very competitive space because, if I think of my own contract, I'll stay there because I get a great service and everything. But the moment that, and this is true for anything, right? When we think about the apps that we use on our phones or the favorite websites, retailers maybe that we use, as soon as we have a problem, we decide, nope, that's it, we're going to move elsewhere. So I can imagine it's a very competitive industry.
Indeed, it's a really different type of world. And you, as you already mentioned, in fact, you have to make a distinction between two important things. The traditional way, how telco is doing, and the modern way, or where telco is going.
Mm.
If you look into traditional, as you have already mentioned, is that you use your cell phone. I believe about 90% of the world has a cell phone and it's just used to call. Now, with the revolution of smart devices, smartphones, we're getting more and more into that apps, services, streaming, etc. Secondary, if you look besides telco, you have a lot of telcos are also providing television and media streaming platforms.
Mm.
We all know the Netflixes, etc., but know that a lot of providers has also their own platform. Also, that will automatically result in getting more and more presence at the end customers and also require another vision as from the past having bad experience and moving to another one into going to maximize the let's say the overall experience in fact and really to grab the customer, keep them with you, and how do you maintain this for the coming years and hopefully getting profitable in the end, of course.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I guess then let's maybe just, and for me myself as well, answering this question, for those folks who don't really know about telco and telephony as an industry, If I think about clouds and where it could actually help, I might struggle a little bit because I don't really know where it could help. Apart from some of the obvious areas with, say, customer facing websites, customer systems, all of these kind of things. But how can cloud help maybe a telco company, for example?
I believe there again we need to go to the bare essence. And if we talk about telephony, if we talk about communication, there are a few important things you have to make aware.
Mm.
You have one side our end customers who has the phone and who has the all the subscriptions, etc., for the services. On the other side, you have the provider, the guy who will make sure that you are able to call from A to point B. And in between, you need lines. And that's also how telco is known, as the guys who are putting cables in the ground to be able to communicate. Now, if we think about that and the ability to communicate over those lines, you already have to know that the telco has a lot of power. And the ability to have those communication lines being depending on them to be call your wife, your friends, or even doing your work, give them a lot of power. And what we see in the recent years, if we look into the evolution of telephony and technology, we see coming more and more opportunities. And that's where really the cloud journey really starts. If you look in, and we go back to the basic, your cell phone and your wife. That's the example for today.
Sure.
So don't be afraid. In the beginning, if you call to each other, it's just data transferred through line.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happening. Now that the world is more and more evolving, also more and more data. In the beginning, it was voice. Now we go into text messages with photos. We go into videos. We go into live chats, and so on and so on. Knowing that all this data is transferring to that same line coming from that telco provider, it's starting to get really interesting. What if a telco provider is able to read, maintain, optimize the data that's transferred through his line and enable new capabilities? And you have to be careful about two important things. One of the things that fears the people the most is security, compliancy, regulations.
Mm-hmm.
We all know the Snowden case, for example, where the NSA was trying to listen to crazy stuff that people are saying. But the same counts also for telco providers. So there is
Mm.
first a level of trust which is necessary. What can my provider do and what can my provider see? Secondary, that's another important part, is what can I do with the data? If we look into a more modernized world, we are looking, for example, into AI, machine learning, certain autonomous driving, IoT, and all those kind of things. And that brings me back to what I said between your wife and yourself in the telephony. Your cell phone turns into from a telephone device to call into a smart device, an IoT device, which enables more and more capabilities. And that's also how the model of telcos will change from economical point of view, where they first try to sell you just a subscription to call. They now try to sell you additional services on top. And then we have new capabilities like the 5G connectivity, the Wi-Fi 6, and all these kind of things that allows you to be available everywhere, whenever, but also have access to features whenever you want. And I believe that's one of the most important things that you should know, that if you look into the evolution from telcos, that this is the part where we are working on.
Understood. So it's, I guess, moving away from that traditional, it's in the name, right? Telephony, the phone bit, and thinking about telecommunications, I guess, in general, no matter what form of communication, thinking about that virtual, whether it's on various social media platforms, whether it's text messaging, whether it's phone, maybe there's new ways that we haven't even thought of yet. Mind control or something, I don't know. But you get the idea, really pushing the boundaries of how you can go and communicate with others then.
Yeah, indeed, and I come back indeed to what I mentioned. I believe that in the world as we know now, and especially during the last pandemic that we also have and still are in, that communication is important and communication is really the key. And we are trying to define, and that's what we try to do with every technology, is to try get more and get it cheaper. And also for the folks who have kids, they also know that if you go to the mountains and they want to send a snapshot or a TikTok video, they need also access to the internet, to the global network, etc. And that's also where telco providers currently are heavily investing in through a few new technologies, while we have first our fiber optics that allows us to get more and more data into the air. We have the 5G connectivity, which allows to increase the amount of data that can be transferred wireless from phones towards users. We have the ability of edge computing, that we will cover a little bit later, where we have real-time analytics, not only for us as normal people, but also for businesses. And it can be coming from critical businesses like hospitals in the Medicare. I will show some cases afterwards, but also in the manufacturing, the oil, the energy sector, etc. And everything is getting connected and connected. And there is only one key that is missing or is necessary, and that's a telco carrier, a provider. And I believe also that that's in the strategy of Microsoft. If you see into the offerings that Microsoft is building in the past years, where they're really focusing on cloud computing, getting their regions up and ready, they have discovered that we cannot be everywhere, but we want to build the world's computer. It's one thing that Satya said. And to be able to be everywhere, you also need to be able to put your software, your knowledge, your solutions at where it is needed. And then we come into edge computing, private edge zones coming from Microsoft, the ability to run services on your device, on your TV, etc., etc. And I think that's a huge shift in the past years, becoming, if we look into the previous decades.
Yeah, it's a really interesting evolution, and I think before we jump into that, something that really stood out as well in what you said there as well, Ivo, is thinking about something that people like me, and I'm sure others who use the cloud day in, day out, just take for granted, is this huge network that is available, right? This whole backbone, this whole network plane that is available. There is different data centers across the globe. They're all connected by this fiber that is running under the seas, running under the ground and everything, and connecting all these data centers. That again is something that can be used to drive and build some of those global solutions, because this is the thing, the difference about, I guess, the nature of a telco kind of solution is that it's not like certain applications where it's available for a subset of users in this geography or over here. It is a global service, and you need to have that presence everywhere.
Indeed. And there is also one necessary thing there is also the close collaboration between telcos. As you know, there is also a really strict regulation about how far you can go with your services. It's coming from a competitive and a political thing. Assume, for example, that we have, I'm from Belgium, we look into the US and we have a bad relationship. Knowing as a telco is operating as a Belgian provider in the US, it can be looking for political conflicts, etc. And maybe that's also one of the reasons why it's really important that, first of all, in every country have their own carriers, their own lines,
Right.
Because again, we refer to what the NSA, FBI, and everybody thinks that they are doing, but also really important to have your services for your people there. What you see, especially Europe, is now also looking into getting more and more into that global scale to have the ability, as you have been mentioned, bringing services to everywhere and who it wants, whenever it wants. If we look to one of the solutions, Azure Space, for example, I don't know if you hear about it. It's about a satellite network. It's the same thing like what Elon Musk is trying to do with its coverage of his satellite Starlinks. It's getting crazy, and it's getting more and more and more and more. And if we then see to the new devices that will come on the market, let's see, the best example is self-driving cars, especially because everyone wants to drive electric. And electric means also you need the maintenance and you need all this kind of stuff. And this is, I believe, one of the key enablers and the key evolutions that will be pushed through while telcos are jumping into cloud computing. I believe one part is also important, that I don't think that telcos are developing their solutions themselves. I think they are more looking into partnerships with other companies who build top-notch technology. Because again, as a telco, you are not a software vendor. You are a carrier, a deliverer. You enable, it's like the sea, and building a river or a channel. That's what telcos do. And the ships and everything on top are hosted by other people, other companies that can use the channels and the ships, the channels and the seas to go from point A to point B.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think what I said in the beginning, I don't have a background in this industry at all. So everything I read and see, I'm taking at face value because I don't have that appreciation and that depth. But when I see things like, and I don't know if you caught it, there was an announcement on the Microsoft News Center back in June that AT&T are partnering actually with Microsoft and running their mobility network on Microsoft Azure is a big deal. And when you start looking at some of the other things that Microsoft's announced with like Azure for Operators, some of the announcements that they've put out around, not announcements, but acquisitions, I should say, about companies like Affirmed Networks, Metaswitch Networks.
Yes, indeed.
I can kind of see the pieces coming together, but like I say, I don't have that industry expertise to kind of go, right, we don't need to be in that game now. We will focus on this bit, and Azure or the cloud, whichever provider is now our infrastructure for that. Is that kind of how you see it unfolding?
Yeah, in fact, what Affirm and Metaswitch, etc., are doing, they are all the enablers.
Yeah.
So in fact, they are allowing the capabilities of building or running all the other services on top. We talked about the network, so let's forget that part.
Sure.
But we are talking about the RAN, which is the mobile connectivity capabilities, where we have the cell towers, etc. Those are not set by Microsoft. They need other vendors to do that. If we look into IoT and the wireless SIM card machine-to-machine communication, Microsoft will not build them themselves, those modules. They are provided by Affirmed, for example, where I have been working with also in the past on certain projects to really get that thing going. Second area, and if we really look more, zoom in what Microsoft is doing, for example, what Microsoft has done with the private edge zone, the previous MEC and NEC story, what they did is, look, we have the box, we have the network in a box. So assume that you are in a harbor, assume you are in a hospital, and you put the box in place. Immediately, all the devices that are using telecommunication services, so it's SIM card based, I'm talking about that, can immediately connect with that box, can have the first features of Azure. We are talking about data analytics, Azure Functions, Cosmos DB, etc., and then go straight into the public cloud where the big analytics is ongoing. And the ability to be so mobile, even with your compute services, that is really the real power of having telco network in a box at certain facilities. I can give an example from what I did 5-6 years ago. I had a guy who was in Saudi Arabia, and he was just once in the middle of the desert. In the desert, you don't have a line.
No.
So what we did is we used their telecommunication services. It was through satellite with Cesastra, towards the public cloud, really to go there. But imagine what are the capabilities if you have rural areas, somewhere in the Andes, etc., for schools and all these kind of things. What are all the capabilities and the possibilities?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Like from this discussion, I hadn't really appreciated the potential with the Azure private edge zones. I think it was we were talking about all the private edge zones. But that ability for me to be able to have my device, switch it off from maybe the main carrier, put it onto this private edge zone, and then suddenly, I'm not worried about VPN or any of that, but actually I'm connected onto that network for that private zone for whatever reason. Obviously, there'll be other things to consider, security, etc. in there.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
But the ability to be able to do that either with private edge zones or, like you were saying earlier, with Azure Space and the fact you've got satellites just floating around the planet, which suddenly I can pick up the connection to those and then have that connection straight into Azure. I'm a huge fan and geek about the Azure Space stuff, by the way.
Yeah, me too.
It's just so fascinating when you start piecing all of these pieces together, and I now get where you're coming from, that you've got all these different components and you can see this big picture that is starting to come together.
I think also that the cool thing and the strength that we have here is the single ecosystem. And it's something that is very often forgotten. We are talking a lot about multi-cloud strategies or maybe only public cloud, hybrid, etc. But if you stay within the Microsoft ecosystem, have the ability to have all the services from the cloud till the edge, identically from deployment, from service, from quality. That's, I believe, what the real aim is from Microsoft, first of all, but secondary, what the contribution can be for telcos to have really the connectivity capabilities everywhere.
Understood. No, I get
Also,
that.
yeah,
Please.
feel free. Yes. So maybe what's also interesting is the how do we manage it? Because if we look also again in the past, we are coming from a traditional world and everything is going manually. If we look into automatization, we look also in the telco world that getting things more and more automated. And we started with software-defined networking, but it goes even beyond. And I believe that there's also a really huge potential to getting more efficient and faster delivery of certain services, where in the past you have to maybe 2-3 weeks to get your connectivity up and running, and now you have a single click and you can connect to anyone everywhere in the world.
It does raise an interesting question, doesn't it, about if thinking about an internet line, for example, not strictly the telephone lines now, but thinking about internet connections, if there was almost this central grid, this central backplane, for example, that you could connect to, and then providers just interfaced onto that, and it was suddenly super easy to connect in. As a consumer, that's a great experience for me. I love that. But B, as a provider, as a telco provider, you get benefit that actually you could potentially reach new customers because anyone can now connect into you. And it's a case of you focusing on your core business, right? It's not a case of you worrying about that underlying platform anymore. That's dealt with.
Yeah,
You focus on that
indeed.
value add.
Yeah, definitely. And I fully agree on that one. And if we sit there, we covered, in fact, we have a network, we have the connectivity, we have the wireless part, we had our end customers who can connect everywhere, which is all really nice. But I'm also a guy who really loves to think about the ethical part of it. The questions I get a lot from customers is also, it's good that you be available or being everywhere, and it's not conspiracies, this stuff, etc. But it's also something you have to think about. Okay, what are the disadvantages of having connectivity
Yep.
everywhere?
Yep.
What is the impact? I know that, for example, in the UK, there are guys who are jumping into cell towers to put them on fire because the 5G is causing headaches, or maybe it's the reason of the COVID, etc. So it's really important to also educate people about what might be the effect and what might the advantages and disadvantages. One of the best advantages I always say is I compare everything I do with the hospital. If you look into a hospital and you break your leg or you have a cardiac arrest, for example, and you run into the hospital, you want a doctor as fast as possible. You want the best treatment. You don't like a guy who is only 50 on his degree at the end. You want a top-notch guy who is a master or whatever. And you want also aftercare, and it doesn't need to be too expensive. So those are four things that are really important. And if you look into IT, I always say the same. Imagine the ability that you run in, and this is a case that where Telco for Operators is a perfect thing. I have something at home. I have a cardiac arrest. What happens is they call a doctor. The doctor needs access to my medical files. In the past, it's maybe mostly they do a lot of call or maybe do a prep, etc. Now they have a tablet, and with the tablet they can directly connect towards the cloud where your medical file is stored. You go back to the hospital. They know what you have. They give you a medication, but the medication is also measured. It's measured by some, let's call it now an automatic system. It doesn't really matter, but know that they know exactly what you have. The moment you enter in the hospital and you have been checking in, it means that your personal record, your medication history list, all these things are set and are sent to the right doctor or not the right infirmary. If you go there, all of those steps that I'm now talking about, all those devices needs to be connected. And that's why it's interesting that you say, I have, for example, an edge device in the ambulance. Why? Because every millisecond counts. And that's maybe also a really important thing if we talk about operators. It's the time between the data and the action. And in a medical situation, it can be really urgent that we do millisecond work, so which means that we need edge devices and 5G everywhere. For a farmer who is taking care of his crops, if it's 1 hour or half an hour, 90% of the time, it doesn't really matter. But it's again really important that if you use such use cases, that you really have to think about, okay, how do I use it? Where do I use it? And is it necessary?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think telco providers and telephony is one of these cross-cutting industries that you mentioned, medicine there, you mentioned farming. It doesn't matter what the industry, there is an expectation that you're going to be there, that it's available, that it's ready to use. And it could quite literally mean life and death. You know, if you can't make that phone call to do a 999 call, for example, it could quite literally mean life or death. And it's just interesting listening to how that is positioned as an industry amongst all of this from a technology perspective as well. Because whenever we build solutions, we build requirements, we think about those non-functional requirements. You know, what's the uptime SLA, what's the availability requirements, and all of these things.
And that's also why, for me, it's always important that if you do some implementations in technology, look into the end of the chain. What's for the end user? What's for the business into it? And not, I don't really care about SLAs and SLIs. And okay, it's important because I know, for example, if you have a web shop, we all know the Amazon web shops and the Alibabas, etc. If they are down for 1 hour, they have an issue because they use $1 million of euros or dollars or in money. What you also have is on the other side is to see, okay, what's in it for the end customer? The end customer is not like, I want my stuff immediately. Yeah, I can wait an hour. So it's more in interest of the large corporations. What for the end customers might be interesting is like, if you look into psychology, people are deciding to order something in X amount of seconds. So imagine that you are walking around the street and it's Black Friday, you know it, and there comes a pop-up while you are passing the store that says, in that store you have now, if you decide within 1 minute, you have a 50% discount. Those technology is driven by edge computing and is driven by telcos because they are the guys who have your cell phone, signal, etc., and are able to push those messages. So there is also a huge opportunity in new cases and new scenarios that can be developed through such technology.
It's really interesting. Like, it's I don't know if you've ever watched a show on Netflix, Black Mirror, at all.
Yeah,
cool.
A huge fan of it.
Oh, good. It sometimes technology has this way of being truly awesome, but then it can be scary as well, right? And that's one of those scenarios where you're walking past this shop or you're walking into whatever environment or establishment or wherever, and if it can detect you there, and back to your points about what is it collecting, what is it doing in the background, and that transparency, hugely important in that use case, because what's that famous saying, with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I think that definitely holds there, because absolutely it could be used for advertising, and fine, there's obviously privacy rules that need to be followed, but what's almost the Black Mirror version of that? How could it be turned on its head? And I don't think you need to push it too far to think about some of those too. So it's interesting.
No, but you also have to look into the opportunity. Yeah? And I'm an opportunist, and I always try to push that limit into technology, but also within the boundaries of what's ethical and what's responsible.
Exactly.
And I believe from the last topic, which might be also interesting, maybe to close off, is about why is it so difficult for telcos to adopt cloud? Because it's also something that really pops up quite a lot. And myself, being working for a former telco provider, I experienced that it's a two thing again. It's always into issues are always on two sides of the medallion. On the one side, it's the business model. I want to stay polite, but in my opinion, and again, I'm not talking for all telcos or even my former employee, but in general, telco was an easy business. Why? Because everyone needs to call, so you are sure that you have customers. Secondary, no matter the price, in urgent, you really need to be able to call. If you have two players in your country, like in Belgium, we have two large players and then some smaller ones. Yeah, the fight is always between the big ones, and there is not really a price competition, etc., ongoing and political, etc. Like for example, in the Netherlands, our neighbors, there are more telco provider, more competitions. Prices are also much lower. That's one thing. But there is some sentence that says, "Never change a losing team." A winning team. My apologies. Change a losing team, never change a winning team. So it means that from a revenue perspective, if you transform from traditional IT telco business and just going into that lines into more a service-driven organization, you see a lot of first investment need to be done,
Yeah.
but secondary, you see also on your gross margin in the end of the year that it's dropping in the beginning. But it's dropping and it will slightly, and it's something I always say to my customers, it will rise up again after you go through that transformation. The second problem is that because you have been doing so many traditional business, that a lot of times even in the top of the companies you have still people with a quite fixed mindset in this matter. They are like, yeah, I'm a stakeholder, and oh, no stress, we are still going fine. And then you have the other guys, the young guys, who said, yeah, but we nearly have to go to something else, and but we don't have budget. So it's a budgeting versus again change of mindset, change of from coming from an operating model now more a service driven platform. And I believe that's the biggest struggle. How do you cope with it? I believe that's the $1 million question. They have to hire me for that one. No, it's not true. I believe that it's two things. In fact, what I said is like, if you still live on your existing business, you have to keep continuing. You don't have to cannibalize your own business. It's really important to go into that new space and new technologies which are new and emerging. And that's why I mentioned, for example, the hospital scenario, smart cards, smart cities, because it's a sector which is so new for everyone that the competition is rather low than that you have to start taking your own customers. Then come up with one solution that can be built on top. Because first, you are your network owner, so you have the network. The second thing that always comes if we talk about connectivity is security. So you put on top of your connectivity, you put your security solutions. The next one, the moment you have your security and your connectivity there, it's the moment to start landing your applications everywhere. So that will be the next stage. The third stage, or the fourth, in fact, is if your applications are running, you need to be able to manage it. So then you go into manageability, and solutions like Microsoft Azure Arc, which is also a part of the Telco for Operators solution, allows you to manage from the cloud till the edge your solution. And then last but not least, you end up in the servicing model, and that is the part where you bring the added value. And that's also the part where the real money is. If you bring additional value to your end customers, they are willing to pay for you. If you just bring them like everyone else is, then unfortunately it will not work. And the margins will be lower, but how cloud works, it's economy of scale. And it's the same for your business model. Your business model is also more economic the moment you start scaling things up.
Awesome.
But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I see that and I hear that. The analogy I was thinking of as you were explaining it sounds similar to like almost the Uber or the Lyft and disrupting the taxis, right? And Netflix and Prime and all of these others with traditional brick and mortar video stores, for example. It's needing that disruptive agent to come in and start changing the way that people think about telco providers. And it sounds like that revolution is starting to happen, is kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Definitely. That's also why telco providers are renting their infrastructure towards the Netflixes and the stream platforms, because without them, Netflix will not exist. And that's also a really crazy analogy that says like Netflix, it's upcoming, it's big, yes, but they are still depending on some of the traditional companies to get to that customer. And they have to use, as a telco, you have to use that power to really not turn them over, but really use the maximum benefit and bring maybe additional stuff with your Netflix, a little bit, etc., etc.
Gotcha. No, really, really interesting discussion. It's got me thinking about what is the future of that industry. Like even smart cities you mentioned, thinking of the potential there to integrate telephony and telco solutions into a smart city has huge potential, right? It's really fascinating the potential that this industry has when you start integrating into these new smarter scenarios, especially with things like Azure Arc, especially with things like edge computing as well, and that consistent deployment model. Really exciting times ahead. I've gone from knowing nothing to being really excited.
Yeah. For me, it's always being in technology itself already. It's really crazy. It's going really, really fast. But again, there are two important things. Even when technology is really beautiful, you have to be responsible indeed.
Yes.
You have to take care of the ethical part, but you can also not deny it. And that's maybe also one of the most important things. Let it go and let it experience and try to understand what it brings you, because there might be one day that there is something necessary that's not there because there is too much resistance, etc. So, and imagine the hospital that I said, always if you're against something, think about the hospital and says, okay, if I am in that case, where would I like to end? And I hope not in a coffin. So
could not agree with that statement anymore, I think. So Ivo, I guess to start wrapping us up here, really, really great discussion. Great to hear your thoughts in terms of where the industry is and how technology and cloud in particular can help really propel that industry forward, and some of the potential technologies and opportunity areas. Yeah. What would you want to leave with people, maybe as your kind of closing thoughts here? From everything we've talked about, what should be the things to stick in people's minds here?
I would wrap up with one sentence. Be aware, cloud is there. And there I really mean it's like, look, every time you use your cell phone, try to think about where we come from. In the last decades, there has been changed a lot. Every year there are new features, new capabilities. It's getting bigger and bigger. And I believe that we are only on the bottom of it yet. And I would give the people just the courage to try to explore, try to use, but also provide feedback to those who built the technology, to Microsoft, towards the provider, about how they can help you to go into that next level, either with your business, either with your personal life. And I believe if that's the things you can do, it would be amazing. And
awesome.
We go ahead.
Ivo, I've got one action for you now to take away from this call, okay? You've got to design a t-shirt or something similar that has the tagline, "Be aware, cloud is there," with your face, with a like a phone, with one of those kind of old phone cord type things going into a cloud. That's your action. You've got to do that.
I will do it, and I will send you a picture. I promise you. So it will take a week to order it, so I will make first a small design. But I believe by the end of the year, I promise you, I will also ship one to you.
Because that is an awesome tagline. And as soon as you said it, my mind just went to that as a design. So that is awesome. No, great session, Ivo. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the discussion. Your time. Yeah, no, thank you. And it'll be interesting to see where we are in a year or 2 years' time. Maybe we can have this discussion again.
Feel free to call back, or then it will be maybe through something else.
Exactly. Let's see. Only time will tell. Okay. Thanks, Ivo.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day. Thanks.
So there we go, folks. We have been talking all about telcos, a bit of the history of telcos and the industry and some of the challenges the industry has. Talking then about cloud, how cloud can potentially enhance and maybe disrupt and evolve some of the practices that are available, and really how technology can be used. Thinking about some of the global capabilities of cloud, thinking about things like the networking layer, all the way to through things like edge computing, machine learning, IoT, and even Azure Space. A really broad discussion here today, but a really exciting and interesting one here, folks. So you know what to do. If you've liked this session, please hit like, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, so you know as soon as there is brand new content available. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and until the next one, thanks for listening in and watching, and bye for now.